Force production. Okay, force production. Remember we left off today. Bigger muscles, more force. Why? Go back to the basics. Probably the single most important thing for who is stronger than somebody else, that person has a bigger muscle. Why? More cross bridges. Perfect. Right? More cross bridges. More muscle, more actin, more myosin, more muscle fibers, sometimes bigger fibers, more actin, more myosin, more cross bridges. Perfect. Okay. The second piece, though, right? The second piece is recruitment. Can you turn on, using your nervous system, close to all of the muscle that you actually have? And what I will tell you guys is that for activities that you do not often do, you can't. You're very bad at doing those things, right? An untrained person that we ask to do a new move, like lift weights in a new way, maybe at 75 or 80% of their muscle that they can turn on. Especially if it's big, strong muscle, like your quads or your glutes or your pecs or something. Smaller muscles than your hands if you're untrained, hand muscles, plantar flexors, dorsiflexors, right? Sometimes even the bicep, you're going to be a little bit better because our daily lives, we use much closer to our maximal force in those places. Okay? We recruit or turn on muscle one motor unit at a time. And there's a very distinct pattern or order to which motor units get turned on when. Small motor units, the ones that have the fewest number of fibers in them, get turned on first. Those tend to be slow twitch. When we do kind of moderately sized ones, those maybe some of them will be slow twitch. They will then convert at some point into type 2A. And then the last ones that typically get turned on are the type 2X motor units. Generally, we have very, very few type 2X motor units, and they are ginormous, okay? But they're the ones that are the most difficult for us to be able to turn on because they only have about 2 good contractions in them. And so it's very metabolically inefficient to use them, and so the body just normally chooses not to use them in their interview. Okay? But that's the pattern. That's the pattern, right? I do one squat. I should have done something before that today. I do one squat, okay? Let's just say I use 40% of the motor units in my quads to do that. I then do a squat where I need more force because I got to pick up this chair. Okay, now I use 60%, right? If we could get someone, probably someone like my daughter's size, to come sit in the chair, she would love this. And then I squat with her in the chair, then maybe I need 80 or 90% of the motor units that are going to do that. Right? Then if you do some sort of maximal contraction, you can hopefully get closer to 100. One of the biggest places, okay, I know you guys have had this before, but the fastest and in some instances one of the largest ways to get stronger is to get better at recruiting. Okay, I can ask all of you to do squats or bench or push-ups or something today, and you will be stronger doing those things. Most of you will be tomorrow or on Friday. And it's because your motor cortex and your spinal cord learns to recruit better within like a day. Okay? So work out today, stronger tomorrow. It's because of this change in nervous system recruitment. Muscles haven't gotten bigger, we don't have more active myosin today. That takes months to get bigger muscles. But this happens really fast. Okay? I mentioned this the other day. There's some advantages to recruiting the type 1 or the slow twitch motor units first. One, they're very resistant to fatigue. Okay, as I'm walking around, I'm using the same sort of first, let's just say 10 or 15% of motor units in my plantar flexors, my dorsiflexors, maybe my quads, over and over and over again as I walk. As I talk, okay, you're using those initial motor units that are going to be sort of in your throat to control sort of opening and closing and what is the epiglottis, and I don't know, I've forgotten again. Never had anatomy, taught some of that stuff, I've forgotten. That's what's gonna go on, okay? Also, because they're small, we can very finely grade force, okay? Which lets you do low force, fine motor skills, like writing or painting, okay? Or playing a musical instrument. You ever seen somebody like try to play the piano or try to play the violin or the cello or something like all of this? It's very precise, but it doesn't require a lot of force. It's not doing a 1 rep max squat, but it's this very, very precise kind of fine motor skill. When you have a toddler around, you see what it's like when people don't have fine motor skills, right? We were painting last night because toddlers love to paint. Whatever it is, if it will make a mess, that's what we want to fucking do. Okay? And it's great. They make paint, it washes out most of the time and all these things, but you know, she has not learned, and she's way better at 4 2/3. Okay. Should I be really annoying and be like, she's like 57 months old or whatever? If and when you guys have kids, and some of you may be these people, and that's fine, but like, at some point you're like, well, they're 19 and a half months old. Like, what is that? Well, they're a year and a half, right? They're 24 months old. She's 2. So anyway, I don't know where we kind of move from a month to one of these things. She's not very good at this, right? She recruits too many motor units to be able to try to paint. And so because of that, the movement is jerkier, the movement is not quite as precise. We painted a rainbow for my wife. She's gotten a lot better. It was great, right? And other than this, she just also doesn't care that much. And the point of the painting is just sling paint everywhere. But as we learn how to do something, and you can teach yourself how to do something, the nervous system learns, and you can train these kinds of things. Now, some of us, we're already past that stage. Most motor skill development is done by 8, 9, 10. So you didn't do things and run around and jump and I should look at the video today. I'll try to do it for Monday. The things they were doing at her daycare when I went to pick her up yesterday after school would frighten every one of you. But it's also the most fun thing in the world. They were pulling each other on little, you guys remember the little things you could sit on and you could kind of do this and it would move you around, like little dollies? They were laid on one and had their feet on one, and they were holding on to the back of the tricycle, and they were driving each other around this road. And they're like drifting as they go around with Mario Kart or something. You've never seen 10 5-year-olds having more fun in your life. And that's what they were doing. There was a point to me saying that they were learning motor skills and these kinds of things. But if you don't do these things, right, then you kind of get out of the window of motor development. If you don't learn how to ride a bike until you're 30, then it's more difficult than if you were learning when you were, say, 7 or 8 of those. You can still do it, but there's this window of time where stuff comes in. If you can't catch a ball or something like now, then it's very, very hard to learn how to do that once you're past the age, once you're past very, very, very little, because these are skills that kind of get honed in at those ages. So it's kind of a fascinating thing. Okay, so that's why we want to recruit in that particular order. Nope, maybe. Did it go? Of course not. Okay. Now, I told you guys on Monday that nervous system control is mostly about on or off of a motor unit. But it's not entirely that simple. Okay? It's not always that simple. It is on. You recruit the motor unit. Action potentials are all or nothing. Right? You either get one or you don't. The unit's turned on or it's not. Well, when you use electricity, you have no ability to send half of an action potential, right? Because then nothing happens. It doesn't reach threshold, nothing happens. So the way that we gradate or try to control the extent of things in the nervous system with action potentials is by altering the number of action potentials that you get in a given window of time. Okay? So don't do this, but think about this as I'm going to reach over and I'm going to poke my neighbor in the shoulder. Okay? one action potential, I poked you. Okay, that's recruitment. I fired, you felt it, I touched you, that's on. Okay, don't touch your neighbor without their permission. Sometimes even with their permission, don't touch them. Okay, that. Now, what the nervous system will do is rather than just doing that, it's just like it's on or it's off. It will say it's on, but then it's like ping, 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 ping versus ping, 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 ping. Okay, we will alter and gradate the number of action potentials that are going to arrive at a motor neuron or arrive at the neuromuscular junction in a given window of time. And in some instances, right, that will allow us to generate more or less force. Okay. So what happens is I can turn a motor unit on and it starts off at one place. And in that motor unit, I can make those fibers generate a few more cross bridges. But the way that I do that is by increasing the number of action potentials I'm going to supply to that motor unit in a given window of time. Okay. And so we use a combination of both of these things of I can lift the chair, I've got a certain number of motor units turned on, and I'm sending action potentials to every one of them, and what's going to blow your mind is that every one of them is getting a different number of actions. Okay? To get just this exact precise amount of force. Because sometimes adding another motor unit gives me too much force. And so then I can't hold the chair or I can't paint and play the instrument the way I want. So I need a way to modulate kind of in between what's happening. Okay. The reason that this happens, the reason that it allows us to work is again going to fall back on the signaling processes that are involved in the process of excitation contraction coupling. Okay. So if we remember, we release acetylcholine across the neuromuscular junction. We get an action potential on the sarcolemma. It's going to go down the T-tubule, activate DHP, open ryanodine, and we release calcium, right? And it's that release of calcium that is going to be the event that initiates a muscle contraction. That's the thing that's going to get us to be able to form cross bridges, okay? So you also hopefully remember we talked about there's an enzyme on the sarcoplasmic reticulum called the calcium ATPase. It's basically a vacuum thing. You release calcium, the calcium ATPase immediately begins to pull that calcium back into the SR so that it can turn off a contraction. Okay? So there is a period of time from ryanodine opens, calcium goes out until all of it is pulled back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum by the calcium ATPase. That window of time is called the active state. Okay, the active state. Active in this instance means there's calcium available in the cell to bind to troponin. So it's a time when we could actively begin or form cross bridges. That's where the name comes. Okay, and so what I want to show you guys here, okay, is a sequence of events that's happening inside of a muscle fiber. So the top panel is showing the membrane potential. This is the electrical charge across the sarcolemma or across the T-tubule. Okay. Then you can see graph under that is going to be locked in time sequence the concentration of calcium in the cytosol, so inside the cell, out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, but inside the muscle fiber. And then the very bottom one, this is going to be tension or force generated by that muscle fiber. And so what you note is we get a change in membrane potential, so we get an action potential. There's a slight delay, then calcium gets released, okay, and then a slight bit more of delay, and we get cross bridge formation and tension or force in that muscle fiber. And you will note, right, membrane potential, it shuts off, it's going to go down and repolarize. calcium goes way up and then it is going to be sucked back in by the calcium ATPase here. It's going to fall, and there's still going to be a little bit of delay before the tension is going to fall back. So this period of time that I've highlighted in red, after action potential in the T tubule, okay, ranity opens, it closes, calcium ATPase sucks all the calcium back in. This period of time when there is calcium floating free in the cytoplasm, which means it combines into troponin, which means we can get into that's the active state. Okay. The length of time the calcium is out matters, as does the total amount of calcium. Both the height of this peak and the width of this peak matter. The more peak amount of calcium there is, the more chances that calcium can bind to troponin that we can get crossbreak. The longer the window of time is before calcium comes back down to zero, the longer it is, the greater chance, right, that calcium can bind to troponin. Okay, does that make sense? How many of you are going to the football game? Are we at home again this weekend? Is there a game this weekend? Or is a game that we're not here? It's in Tulsa? At Tulsa? What? They let that. Don't play like non-conference, non-power 5 schools at good place. Okay. What else? You've been to a sporting event, right? Or you've been to, I'm not even going to suggest it. You've been to Logies or someplace on a Thursday or a Friday or any night of the week, right? Think of this. Calcium gets released. It is pure random laws of mass action chance that it will bind to troponin. It's like being at the football game in the student section. When there's more people, if every person is a molecule of calcium, the larger number there is, the greater chance you're going to bump into your neighbor, right? You're walking around, your eyes are closed. The more of you I put in this room, the greater the chances are that when you all walk around with your eyes closed, that you're going to bump into each other, right? The more of you in this room and the more chairs I put in the room, the greater the chance that you're going to do that. Or the longer I tell you to walk around randomly in the room, the greater the chances that you're going to bump into a chair or each other. That's how all of these things work. It blows my mind if you ever get anything ever happens in physiology. That's how this works. Okay? So that's why the height of that peak and the width of it both are going to matter. And we're going to use the number of action potentials that get sent to that muscle fiber to manipulate both the peak and the width of the active state. And use that to get more force production. Okay? You guys with me so far? Because if you're not with me, then the next stuff is really gonna blow your mind. Okay? So I will mention this here if only because we get questions about all of this. Okay? One of the things that we know that caffeine can do, there's a caveat to this, is caffeine leads to, it increases the peak of the calcium release out of the ryanodine receptor. Calcium, or there are adenosine receptors on the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So if I give you caffeine, it will block those adenosine receptors, and therefore it can lead to greater, greater calcium release. Caveat is that you got to drink like 150 Red Bulls to get to that level of caffeine. In an isolated muscle that we've cut out of you or an animal, or in an isolated muscle fiber that we've gotten from you or from an animal, we give what are called a millimolar dose of caffeine. Okay? What you guys get in your blood from drinking a Celsius or a cup of coffee or a Red Bull, or in my instance, Diet Mountain Dew, whatever it's going to be, are what we call micromolar doses of these things. And the amount of caffeine that you need to make it do this will kill you. Okay? It will kill you. So you may see things about this. We will talk about there is research that says this is true, but the dosing is so high, it's not ever going to work. If you want to see something scary, you can Google. There was research being done in Britain a few years ago, and well, they won't let us do this. I believe one of their grad students had the analytical balance. They were making their own caffeine pills, and they had it set on grams rather than milligrams. If you guys look on the back of whatever it is that you're consuming, like there's 100 and there's 80 milligrams of caffeine in a Red Bull, right? In like an 8-ounce Red Bull. And so rather than getting 80 milligrams, they gave the person 80 grams, right? They had their decimal place off by a couple, which they should have realized that they were giving them like a mountain. If you make a little caffeine capsules like this big, they would have like this mountain of these kinds of things, but they almost killed the person. And that's why the IRB here doesn't think I can use a balance and won't mix us. We can't mix up caffeine ourselves and allow it to buy it from a pharmacist. And I'm like, I have basically a minor in chemistry, like I can use the balance. They're worried about things like that. Okay. That was enough caffeine that person probably was getting some increases in those things, but also is enough that it can kill you. Okay. Okay. Before we get into how we use active potentials to manipulate the active state, I also wanted to bring up a couple of other kind of ideas, okay? Because I think it will be helpful and it will make sense. So what you guys see here, these are what we call contractile properties of individual muscle fibers, okay? The origin of these measures, so these are functional measures of your muscle fibers. It describes how quickly they can generate force, how quickly they can relax, okay, as well as how much force you can gain. These properties and these measurements derive from early exercise physiology in the 40s and the 50s, before we were able to actually sort of see down into muscles, understand what their myosin ATPase was doing, understand their calcium ATPase. All we could do was pull the fiber out, zap it with electricity, and see how it behaved on how much force we could get and how quickly we could do it. Okay? So these first two are measuring similar things. It's called time to peak tension and then rise time. Okay, they're going to describe the same thing. This tells us about how quickly, once we release the calcium, how quickly we get force, okay, and how quickly it ramps up in an individual muscle fiber. This is where the idea of fast and slow twitch muscle fibers came from. Okay, fast twitch fibers have a faster or therefore shorter time to peak tension and a faster or steeper rise time. If you look at it here, you can see an example from like an eye muscle, a thing that would cause you to blink, and then we'll pick something, we'll just say it's supposed to be from the soleus, but we're going to say it's from the gastroc, because the soleus would be more down here. Okay, but you guys notice the difference in shape of these curves, right? Now this one goes up much faster, it's much steeper on the front end. Okay, fast twitch muscle. Eyes need to contract very, very fast, so that if I, right in front of you, or your 4-year-old throws something at your face, which also happens a lot, you can close your eyes and protect them. Okay, soleus outside of your diaphragm, and most of you, your soleus is the slowest muscle in your body. It's a postural muscle, and so it's going to have a sort of less steep rise up to here, and then also a less steep sort of relaxation. So time to peak tension or rise time. Time to peak tension is from 0 force to peak force. You just express it in a unit of time, usually it's in milliseconds. Okay. Rise time is a slope. You take the slope from about right here to right here in this kind of linear portion of the rise. It's going to tell you the same thing, right? The steeper the slope, the faster your time for each peak tension. This tells us about myosin ATPase function. You can come to my lab, we can do this on everyone. Not a problem. Okay. I can't tell you from this your proportion of fast and slow, but I can tell you relative to everybody else's class if you are faster or slower or about the same from a fiber type distribution. There's also a thing where we're going to look at the relaxation side. So it's called half relaxation time. And it's the time that it takes to go from peak down to about 50% of force there. So it's this period of time on the backside. That tells us about calcium ATPase function. Generally, fast switch fiber, myosin ATPase, so it generates force faster. You know, they also have faster calcium ATPases, so they shut force off. This will become important in the next slide. Okay, when I tell you why we modulate force a little bit differently among some of our different sizes of motor units that may have different fiber types. Okay, because how fast it goes up and how fast it comes down is going to play a role in how many action potentials we have to be able to send in a given window of time to basically get it to not relax on the back. All right. One of my favorite graphs, right? Because I'm nerdy. I love a good graph. I really do. All right. What you guys can see here, this is a measure, okay, from what's called a needle EMG or electromyography. These people take a little needle and they jam the needle into your first dorsal interosseous muscle, right here, the muscle that controls your ability to move your index finger like this. Okay. You stick it in there, and they wiggle it around. I've had this done, it's not the most pleasant thing. Okay? Wiggle it around until they can find it in a location where we can feel like we're getting an electrical signal from one motor unit. Okay? So it is in close proximity basically to the motor axon of one motor unit. You then ask the person to do this with their finger and press against something and generate incrementally larger amounts of force. Okay, so press a little bit, press really, really hard. And what we see is something that looks like this. So this is 2 grams of force, 5 grams, 10 grams, 20 grams of force being generated by your index finger. This is measuring the exact same motor unit. Every spike that you see on here represents a change in membrane potential along that axon. That is one action. Okay? And so we're going to calculate something called firing frequency. Firing frequency is, if this is some unit of time, let's just say it's 5 seconds. It's not, but let's say it's 5 seconds. And I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 action potentials in 5 seconds, right? Divide the 17 action potentials by that 5 seconds, and we're going to get a firing frequency, okay, of what, a little over 3. It's like 3 and 3.4 or something action potentials per second. Okay. That's called firing frequency. We look here as the force goes up, the motor unit's still active, but now we've got a whole lot more action potentials, don't we? More force, more action potentials. And then more still and more still. And so you can calculate, this is like 3, this might be about 10. Right? This might be 20, this might be 25. So what we're getting from this is you're seeing how the nervous system, when it wants to get more force from a given motor unit, will fire more action potentials into that motor unit faster. Okay. So now you may ask and say, well, Dr. Black, this is great, but how does more action potentials get me more force? Okay. And it has to do with the active state. It has to do with the calcium ATPase and how quickly we can clear the calcium out in this window of time between action. Okay, so let me kind of show you what this is going to look like. We'll do the big picture first, and then I'll dig into the individual details of what has happened. This is what's called a force frequency curve. I may very well ask you to draw this on the test. Okay? It's called a force frequency curve. Can you guys anybody work as a PT tech or a helper in a PT clinic or someplace and you've seen people get electrical stimulation? Probably tens or something. You guys ever set the frequency, the firing frequency, or set something in hertz on those simulators? What the hertz on the simulators is the number of electrical potentials in a given window of time. That's firing frequency. So you come to my lab. We have the PT simulators, but we have even fancier ones that we can do the more fun things with. And what we do is basically you start off at manipulating the firing frequency, and then you measure how much force you're getting from that whole muscle. Okay, so let's just imagine this is a quad muscle. You've got a person, they're in the lab, they're sitting, you're putting these big electrodes on their quad muscles, and then we're going to artificially give them, right, like 1 second of stimulation at 5 action potentials in that second, or 10 action potentials in that second. It's the same muscle. All we're doing is manipulating firing. And we see a curve that looks like this. Okay? As firing frequency tends to increase, there's this positively accelerating increase in force from that muscle up to some point where it will then level off. In this particular one, that's at about 50 hertz or so. So at about 50 action potentials per second, force levels off. So I give you 50 hertz or I give you 100 hertz and I get the same amount of force. Okay? So what we're going to talk about in the next slide is why is this what's happening here? What is going on inside a muscle fiber that as I get more action potentials, it allows me to form more cross bridges. And then what happens out here, it says at some point, because force levels off, at some point, no more cross bridges. I formed all the cross bridges that I can in that period of time. And no matter how much harder the nervous system drives, I can't get more force. Okay? So we're going to talk about what's going on underneath all that. You guys with me? Y'all still with me? Do we need to get up and do a couple of squats and manipulate our recruitment and manipulate our firing rates a little to wake everybody up? Everybody that didn't shake your head, stand up. No. My people on Zoom, somebody turn your camera on and start doing squats. So anyway, all right. So we'll do the next little bit. Okay. So you all may have heard these terms when you took human physiology. I'm not sure. Okay. But what I'm going to show here is, and this is a thing that we can illustrate really. I should have brought a tennis unit or something. And we could demonstrate this. Maybe I'll try to remember on Monday, and I can bring one of the simulators. But when we manipulate firing rates, we're going to get, if we send one action potential, so a stimulation at 1 hertz, you get what's called a muscle twitch. Okay, it's going to contract once, pain done. Okay, force comes up. Calcium gets sucked back in, force comes back down, 1 action potential. That is this. Okay, that's what's happening right here. This is that contractile property that I was showing you guys earlier. That's a twitch. Okay. So what happens then if I give you an action potential and force is going up and it starts to come back down? But then I give you a second action potential before it's had a chance to fall all the way back down. Okay? Or we've had a chance to come all the way back down. We'll do an example of something. Yeah, I've got to buy an envelope so I can learn y'all saves. Can I get 6 people to come up here? 6. We're gonna do a little exercise for me. It'll be fun. I promise it won't be embarrassing. 6 people, come on. Don't make me just like start randomly calling people out. Okay, fine. You have a birthday in October, get down. Everyone's like, no, I don't have a birthday. All right, here we go. See, now people are like, hey, my wife's birthday is in October. And I got 3 people. All right, November birthday. What are my November birthday? Okay, we need 1 more. Oh, here we go. Yes. All right, so down here. All right, so what I want, okay, is you guys are going to be individual calcium molecules. Okay, your individual calcium molecules. So everybody come over here, okay, and stand in relatively close proximity to each other. So kind of squinch together. Squinch together. These 2, y'all come and stand sort of like right in the front a little, okay? Just a couple of y'all. Okay. Perfect. Great. Calcium molecules inside the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? Inside. Now, we get 1 action potential. All right? You can make Sakshi be our action potential. You guys know Sakshi? This is y'all's PA. She grades and things. If you have complaints, direct them to Sakshi. Right? So, no, there's always me. So, what Sakshi's an action potential, she comes down and just clap your hands, okay? Okay, now, 2 of y'all come over here. 1, 2. Okay? 1 action potential, 2 molecules of calcium get released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? Now we need more people, right? We need my December birthdays. Y'all can come over here and be Owen. Somebody else. We get 2 molecules of calcium. They can then bind to troponin, and we can get a certain number of cross bridges over here. So there's a finite amount of force that we get from you guys. Okay, you've been released. We wait 1001, 1002, right? Calcium ATPase. You guys move back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum with everybody else. Okay, that's a muscle twitch. All right. Okay. Now. Sakshi again, clap for me. All right. My first 2, y'all come here. Okay. Let's just say it takes 2 seconds for them to get pulled back in. It's been 1 second, so y'all are sort of starting the edge. Now stop, Sakshi. Clap again. Another action potential has arrived before they've been able to get back, into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay. New action potential. 2 more of y'all come over here. Okay. Now we have double the amount of calcium floating around in the cytosol compared to where we were to start with. If I have double the amount of calcium, there's twice the likelihood that they'll bind to troponin, therefore twice the likelihood that we will get cross-bridge formation and get force. Okay. That's what's illustrated here. Force starts to come back down, and then boom, another action potential. And so the calcium that is out stays in the cytosol, and we release more. We release new calcium. Okay? So we get an increase in force. Now it's 1001, 1002. Everybody starts coming back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay? That was a 2 Hz contraction, and we've gotten twice the amount of calcium. Okay? You guys with me? Okay. Now, again, Sakshi, clap. Okay, my first 2, y'all go. Again, my second 2, y'all go. They're going to start to come back, and then a third one. And then my last 2, you guys go. Okay? Now we have a problem. We're going to get more force. Sakshi, go again. Okay? No calcium left in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So no matter how many more action potentials we give, there's none left in here. So we cannot get more to come out. And so we can't get an increase in force beyond what we got from the first 3. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So there's this ongoing process. Thank you guys. Y'all clap for them, okay? It's October, we'll bring the birthday. Okay? Or donuts or something. So that's what this is illustrating. Okay. The first thing that I showed you guys, where we get some that goes out then we get action potentials before it's all been pulled back in, and we get an increase in force. That process is called summation. Okay, summation. We are summing the amount of calcium that we're releasing. It's added together, and we get more cross purchase. Okay. The point that we reach, though, when all the calcium is out, is what's called a complete or a fused tetanus. Okay. You guys have heard of tetanus, right? You got a tetanus shot. Okay. Remind me to tell you guys the story when I got attacked by an owl while running and I had to get a tetanus shot. Oh yeah, that's great. Fucking awesome. Never been so scared in my life. When we get to stress response and hormone responses, we'll do it then. Okay. That's where the idea of tetanus comes from. Tetanus is, I think it's a bacteria, right? It's a virus. I think it's a bacteria. Well, why would you get a vaccine for, anyway, I don't know. Doesn't matter. Unimportant. We know that it works. When you have tetanus, then you get sort of like a cramp where you can't move, and all that's happening is you're getting this force production the whole time. That's where it comes from. Okay. The firing rate required to reach a complete tetanus, okay, varies based upon the fiber type of that motor unit. Okay? Based upon the fiber type. During normal contractions in humans, we're going to reach a tetanus somewhere between about 8 and 30 hertz. Okay? 8 to 30 active potentials per unit of time. Very fast motor units, type 2X motor units, they may reach complete tetanus at 70 or 80 hertz. The reason that faster twitch motor units require a greater number of active potentials to reach tetanus is because their calcium ATPase is faster. And so, because, right, we were doing like 2 seconds for them to go back in. Well, what if it wasn't 2 seconds? It was half a second, right? So you're out, and then you're all the way back in. So that when the additional action potentials begin to come in, you got to get more of them more frequently to be able to get all the calcium to go out and stay out, because our ability to pull it back in is so much faster. Okay? So that's why there's this difference. Again, if I want to know things about your fiber type, I can generate this curve for a given muscle and compare yours to somebody else in class. If you're more of a slow twitcher, this thing comes up this way, right? It comes up and it plateaus off at a much lower stimulation frequency. Okay. If we compare your soleus to like an eye muscle, you don't want me to stimulate your eye muscles, I promise you. But something like the quad or something, the quad looks like this, and the soleus is going to plateau like way back over here. So your muscles are a collection of however many slow and fast twitch fibers you have. People with a greater proportion of slow, this curve gets shifted to the left. A greater proportion of fast is going to get shifted to the right. So we can do some things in the lab by just looking at function and try to understand some stuff. Okay. All right. Oh, this makes me so happy. This is, as I told you guys, this is sort of my favorite topic in all of exercise physiology. This is my single favorite graph that I've ever seen. Okay. I dream of making a graph like this for our work. That someday somebody will put in a lecture. This is a paper that was done in the late 70s. It's also my favorite because the last name of the first author is Monster. And so I just think you're like, look at the monster graph. I don't know, I'm completely nerd. What this is showing, okay, this graph to me is the single best visual representation of how the nervous system allows you to generate force. This is showing the combination of using recruitment and firing rate to get any amount of force. Okay? So what this graph depicts is what you do every time you contract a muscle all day long. Okay? Every line on here Every line represents a motor unit. This poor soul had, I don't know, like 50 individual needles jammed into their FBI. This is also from the first dorsal interosseous muscle. Okay, jam them all in there. I have a colleague that used to do this, and he would make the things. He'd have to bake them in his oven at home. That's how you would sterilize them in some ways. So when he was a postdoc at Georgia Tech, that's what they would do. Every line represents a motor unit. Okay, every point that you see, the dot along those lines, represent an instant in time when we measured the firing rate, the firing frequency of that motor unit. So the height here on the y-axis is firing frequency or firing rate, and then the x-axis is force production. So a small amount of force, as much force as that muscle can possibly generate is down. And so what you see from all of this is, when I need a small amount of force, the first thing I do is I recruit one motor unit. Okay, one. It fires at some firing rate. We'll call it 8 hertz in this instance. If I need slightly more force than that, I don't recruit a second motor unit. I just crank up the firing rate within the one that's already on. And it goes up, and I get more and more force until I reach a certain place where, okay, to get my next increment in force, leave the firing rate the same here, turn on a second motor unit. But note that motor unit also comes on at 8 hertz. This one's firing at like 15, that one's firing at 8. The combination of those two gets me some number of cross bridges and gets me precisely the right amount of force that I need for that given task. And it proceeds in this manner over and over again as force production goes up. So what you see is, right, increased firing rate in both. At some point, that's not giving me enough force, turn on another unit. Increase the firing rate in that one to a point, okay, turn on another unit. Over and over and over again. And we do this until we can sort of get the correct combination of a number of motor units, all of them at their own unique firing rates, in order to get us just the right number of cross bridges to get the right amount of force to do whatever it has to. Okay. Then when you do a maximal contraction, way down here on the right, you turn all the motor units on, and we try to fire all of them at as high a firing rate as we possibly can, and that gets us the most force. Okay, there's no motor units left, and we've basically got a complete fuse tetanus in every one of them. That then is your physiological maximal amount of force. Okay. So I would argue probably in this person, they did a maximal contraction. There's probably still a couple more motor units out here that they're not able to turn on. Although in the hand muscles, because they're so small and they don't generate that much force, we have to use maximal force a lot. There may still be a couple out here that we're not able to get. But that's what this illustrates. Okay. So you have some total amount of muscle. That muscle has some architecture and pination and angle that it's going to pull on the tendon. And then you have this nervous system set up with motor cortex, connects to all those motor neurons, that connect to all those muscle fibers, split up into those motor units. But functionally, this is what we do to control how much force you're getting. Okay? This is what we do. If you want to get stronger, then we need to be able to turn on those ones on the right, get more lines turned on, or in some cases, and we need to be able to try to ramp up the number of action potentials that we can send. Okay. We do teach a PhD level class. I can tell you guys how motor cortex sends one signal, and then the spinal cord makes decisions on why you get a different firing rate into every one of those things. It's a pretty wild concept, right? Because you never think about this. You just like turn my muscle on, do this, do that. I need this much force. I need to adjust this much force. You're never thinking about action potential. Okay, this unit's at 8 hertz. I give me another unit at 12 hertz. and this, like we just do it. Okay. So it's a really interesting. Does that make sense? Okay. A couple of kind of broad things that I want you to understand. Small muscles in your hands, your toes, your eyes, your facial muscles. Smaller the muscle, okay, the more likely that muscle primarily changes its force production by altering firing. It's so small, there's so few motor units that it has a hard time it doesn't have a lot of reserve for few individual tasks. The opposite is the case in big muscles, like your quads and your glutes and your lats and those things. Big muscles have lots of extra motor units to do most tasks. Okay, so we don't do a lot of things that max out our quads or our glutes all the time. Probably should, but we don't. So big muscles tend to mostly modulate force initially by just recruiting more motor units. You got them in reserve, turn them all on, let's go. Okay, small muscles, it's much more higher. Okay. So the first relationship that I said you guys are called the force frequency relationship, that has to do with nervous system activity. The next couple of things that we're going to clear when we talk about force production are going to be what we would call mechanical properties of generating force. Okay, you have X amount of muscle, it has an architecture, you have an ability of the nervous system to create cross bridges in those muscles. Now, though, there's going to be some other factors that are going to be very specific to things in and around that muscle and the task that you're performing that are going to say at 50% of my motor units turned on, at 10 hertz firing rate in all of them, I should get X amount of force. But if I change what the task is, or I change the speed of the task, or I change the joint angle, that same 50% of motor units on at a 10 hertz firing rate actually gets me a different amount of force. Okay. And so we're going to talk, we'll kind of get through one, and then we'll pick up the rest of it on Monday, and then we'll do sensory motor stuff. This is what's called the link tension relationship. And I can point out it's actually a sarcomere link tension relationship. Okay. So these are some data that were published in the mid-60s. And what it's going to show you is here is sarcomere length. And I'll talk about what that means in just a second. But here are very, very short sarcomeres. So what they're measuring is, here's a sarcomere. We measure from this Z line where my thumb is to this other Z line where my thumb is. That's the length. So very short, it looks like this. Okay. Then we're going to pull it out and out and out. It's going to get to be sort of the spacing gets wider, the sarcomere is a little bit longer until we get way out here on the right, and it's going to get pulled out like this. Okay. So they do this, and here's what is happening as the sarcomeres become shortened or lengthened with the thick and the thin filaments. It's more so illustrated here in this. Okay. So I'll tell you guys the big picture thing. At short sarcomere lengths, so down here, and at wide or long sarcomere lengths, we get very little force. Okay. In the middle, you get a lot more force. So it sort of looks like this. Okay. We call this place in the middle where you get the most force the optimum sarcomere. Okay. So two things are happening. Okay. Let's think back on this. Where does force production come from? We're always going to go back to this. Where does force come from? Cross bridges. Okay. So if at short lengths I don't get force, what might we assume about cross bridges? Okay, you can't form the cross bridges. Good. At long lengths, if I don't get a lot of force, what should we likely assume about cross bridges? Too much overlap. Too much overlap? What would that do on the cross bridge? So, I over here said, no.
if there's too much overlap, then we'd try to connect, but it would be harder. But if there's no overlap, then they wouldn't connect at all.
Exactly. Also, no crossovers. Okay. It's not quite that simple. It's very easy. Long sarcomere links, actin and myosin, do not overlap with each other. And so the myosin heads cannot physically make contact with the actin molecules. Therefore, they cannot form a crossover. At very, very short links down here, they can usually have some that can connect, but we've got sort of this hyper overlap. And so we can't get the full length of all of the myosin molecule, the full spectrum of myosin heads to be able to bind because it's too short. And then here in the middle, you get what we would call optimum overlap, which means that the largest number of myosin heads can basically all bind to an active molecule. Okay? So again, structure, parts, function. Structure, parts, function. Okay? Just because you also can get a kick out of this, okay? Here's my question. I'm gonna do a squat. Got my stretchy jeans on today. Okay? I'm gonna do a squat. Are my quads lengthened or short? Lengthened. Okay? As I come up, what's happening to? Short. Okay. Here versus here versus here, where am I the weakest? Where am I going to be able to generate the least amount of force? If I'm lifting something, am I stronger here or here? Basically here. Who's done a squat? Start with that. Who's done a squat? Right? Do you ever see people do squats and you're like, ooh, they're doing like this, right? This is the squatting equivalent. I'm sorry, ladies, this is going to be a very terrible thing. This is the squatting equivalent of the 3-pound like pink dumbbells. Okay? We have some at home, they're not pink, they're red. So it's not my daughter uses them. We have pictures of her like trying to bench press. My wife does some dumbbell stuff sometimes, and my daughter has little baby weights that she does things with. Okay? Why is this easier to do than this? Do I? The weight weighs the same. I weigh the same. Do I? It's the muscles. Okay. I'm not generating more force. Oh, that's probably not 100% correct. The weight, I have to have X amount of force, right, to make it go up. It's more difficult to get that force down here than it is here. And then the top part is kind of a whole separate issue on things. Okay? Does that look like this? Does that look like long length, not much force? Somewhere in the middle, more force? Okay, we will talk about this side. I'll leave you with this. I tricked you all. Okay. Because while what I just did looks like this, it's not this. This is what happens in a sarcomere. Okay? In your muscle, 95% of the time, all of your sarcomeres are in about right here. Okay? In this kind of middle 2/3 of the sarcomere link tension curve. Okay? And we'll pick up on Monday about why at the bottom of the squat am I weak? And why does it look like this, but it's not? All right. You guys have a good weekend. Make good choices.